Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the Human Risk podcast. On this episode, I'm speaking to someone who's made a career out of lying. No, I'm not talking to a politician. My guest, Robert Kerbeck, was an actor who became a corporate spy. Now, while you'll definitely know that countries use spies, James Bond being the most obvious fictional example, what you might not know is that companies do the same thing. And Robert's job involved working on behalf of those companies, and we're often talking large, reputable ones you will have heard of, to try to elicit information out of employees at their competitors. By getting those employees to provide commercially sensitive information, such as salaries, the names of people working on particular projects or upcoming deals, companies can obviously get the upper hand on their competitors. And that's what Robert helped them to do. How, why, and what made him stop doing it are things we cover in our discussion. The human risk angle here is obvious. If companies want to protect themselves from corporate spies, then they need to recognise the risk that their employees pose. As you'll hear, we're all susceptible to divulging information we shouldn't, and that's only going to become more of a risk with AI and deep fakes. Robert's book, Ruse, Lying the American Dream from Hollywood to Wall Street, is a fascinating read. And perhaps unsurprisingly, given his previous career as an actor, he's an incredibly engaging guest. It's my discussion with Robert Kerbeck on making a career out of lying. Robert, welcome to the Human Risk podcast.
Well, Christian, I am so excited to be here and to blow people's minds today.
You are definitely going to do that. And to start that off, your book, which is a wonderful read and obviously you wouldn't be here if it wasn't highly recommended, starts off with you impersonating a compliance officer. And given many of my listeners are compliance officers and work in that field, that's not something they would expect to read about. Tell us a little bit how you came to be doing that.
Yeah, well, I will, but I'm going to do a little brief segue. I was actually in Hawaii on vacation maybe about a year ago. The book had just come out, and I met this guy who was a compliance officer for a major publicly traded company. He was in charge of compliance for all of the Middle East. And when I told him about my book, of course, his eyes got wide. And I said, hey, by the way, one of the things we would do is we would impersonate compliance officers. And he was there with a friend. And I'd met him for a minute. I'd listened to him speak for 30 seconds, and I immediately was imitating his voice and pretending I was him. And his friend couldn't believe how much it sounded like this guy. And he was just blown away. Like, wow, I had no idea that there are people out there that are actually going to call up my firm, use my voice, get people to trade on that security that they believe that they really have the chief compliance officer on the phone. And of course, what are you not going to tell the chief compliance officer, right? What secrets are you not? You're going to tell them anything you want to know. If they need help with a password, borrowing your password, resetting a password, information on what people get paid, information on deals that are going down, acquisitions, anything, right? And so going back to the book, when I was a young guy, I was an actor. I wanted to be an actor. I moved to New York, and everyone knows artists and actors need survival jobs, And so a buddy of mine had this job. He said something about it one day, and then he shut up right away. Like he had been told, don't ever tell anybody about this. And I said, whoa, dude, I'm broke. Help me out. I need a job. And so he very reluctantly got me an interview.
I love this, by the way, because you're already getting people to reveal stuff they shouldn't. So we can see glimpses of future success at that early stage.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, and that's what the entire job is about, is getting people to tell you things they should never, ever tell you. And they've been taught, supposedly, to never tell you, right? So I go to the Upper East Side. For your listeners that don't know, the Upper East Side of Manhattan is kind of old money Manhattan. It's the wealthiest area in Manhattan. And I go to, of course, a doorman building. I get, sent up to the penthouse. This woman opens the door, ushers me into the nicest apartment I've ever been into. So right away, I knew whatever this thing this woman did, this company she had, I knew it was incredibly lucrative. Very strange interview. She doesn't ask me anything about my skills. She certainly doesn't tell me anything about the job. She sends me on my way. I think I blew it, but my buddy calls and says, you're hired, but don't get too excited because no one is able to do this job. And the next day I went out to Brooklyn and I started training, and I quickly began to learn that what we were tasked to do was to infiltrate major corporations, public and private, and learn anything and everything we could about them because those secrets were then sold to their top rivals.
And so the reasons that let's just do the obvious question here. So the reasons they do that is for competitive advantage, right? So that could be anything from insider dealing, that could be just to find out what's going on because you want to poach some people. So there are a ton of reasons why you might want to know what's going on in other organizations, the details of who does what there, and all this sorts of information. And so you're getting things that are not available by other means, generally for very good reason, because they are trade secrets or something that you don't want other people to know, and you're kind of unlocking that.
Correct, correct. And so as, here I am now, I'm trying to do this job. And at the time, believe it or not, we were getting $8 an hour. Eventually, I was making $2 million a year as a corporate spy. But before we get to the 2 million part, we'll stay with the $8 an hour. And so in the beginning, we were trying to do this job and get these information. In the beginning, we would go in person and we would go to a conference. We would go to a sporting event where we knew certain firms were hanging out. We would go to bars where we knew certain firms were hanging out. But what we quickly began to learn was we could actually get more information using the good old fashioned social engineering phone call, what I call the Ruse call, hence the title of the book. And we would do these rusing phone calls, and using the anonymity of the phone call, we could be anyone. And one of the things we learned early on is we were trying to develop all these ploys. We had the inside ploy, the audit ploy, the dropping the grapefruit ploy, right? And eventually, the ploy that was the most successful, this goes back to the original question, is the compliance ploy. Because what we learned is that compliance, when we were first starting, was still a relatively new thing, right? It's not what it is today, where there's a chief compliance officer. Back in the day, it was part of legal. At some firms, it is still part of legal, but it's really kind of become a standalone entity and organization because it's so critically important to firms and their ability to operate on a global basis, make sure they're, following all the rules and regulatory constraints. And so we began to learn that as compliance was growing, people were afraid of the chief compliance officer. People were afraid of the deputy head of compliance. And so if you were able to impersonate that person, the other person on the other end of the line would be, I better, I better help this guy. I better, help, And of course, every once in a while they would go, look, you're in compliance. I have to verify you. And they would ask you a couple of token questions, which, being pretty darn good researchers, we would already know the answers to. I would know their cell phone number. I would know the name of their assistant. I would know how many kids they had. I would know where they went to college. I would know I know how long they'd been with the firm. I'd know all of these things. So when the person would question me on a couple of things, I'd say, well, I know you started here, July 2nd, 2004. I wouldn't have that at my finger, whatever, and so people would believe you were this person, and then they would tell you anything. And, in terms of the value of this information, I'll give you one example. So imagine if I were able to learn the names of the design team for, let's say, the iPad in the early days of the iPad. And if I were able to learn the names of the design team, and then we were able to poach 2 or 3 of the people on that design team, right? How valuable would that have been? And it's for that very reason, because now we're talking about Apple. The legendary Steve Jobs was probably the most successful individual in protecting corporate secrets in the history of certainly the technology industry, but maybe even all industries. I mean, he was legendary. And one way he did it, and we'll talk about how firms can protect themselves later. One way he did it is he put the fear of God into people. He said, look, forget about if you release these secrets, you're going to be fired. Forget about that. Yes, you're going to be fired. But more than that, we're going to sue you. We're going to come back at you because we told you not to release these secrets. We told you what the consequences were, and we're going to sue you. And so that, which still continues to this day at Apple, has really made Apple kind of the proverbial Fort Knox in terms of guarding information. And we all know that Apple is just legendary for their secrecy, and they introduce products nobody saw coming. And that goes back to Steve Jobs.
And so there's 2 things that I guess, and there's probably more, but feel free to add to the list. But there's 2 things it seems to me that you really need. One is the research, as you say, so that you can answer those questions, so you know what you're dealing with. And the second is then the ability to impersonate. And so those two things,
Yeah.
in a way, you could say they're very, very different things because one is sort of forensic skill and the other one is a loosely termed a sort of linguistic skill, for want of a better phrase. And so it's quite rare to find somebody with the ability to do both of those things, I guess.
Absolutely, and those two things, I'll change them slightly, but it's the same thing. Is one is a business sense, and the other is this artistic flair, right? That combination is very rare. I was lucky that I had it because I come from a business family. My family were automobile dealers. My great grandfather repaired horse carriages and sold horse carriages before automobiles were invented. Then he switched to automobiles. My cousins, the Kerbeck name, my cousins still have the Kerbeck car dealerships going, started in 1899, still going today. So I came from that kind of car sales, entrepreneurial background. So I had the business side. And then, of course, I went to New York, became an actor, was a fairly successful actor, did over 50 major TV shows, lead roles, starred, in many, many great theatrical plays opposite James Gandolfini from The Sopranos, opposite Callista Flockhart, who's married to Harrison Ford, killed George Clooney on a TV show called Sisters. So he could go on to another show that you probably never ever heard of called ER.
Yeah.
So that was the crazy thing is I was a working actor and we kept telling ourselves, me and my buddy in the book, his name is Pax. He's the guy that got me the job. We kept telling ourselves that this job was just temporary until we became famous. And then at a certain point, my acting career waned and I went deeper into corporate espionage. And that was the time where we got onto the radar of, every three-letter agency in the world. And that was very frightening because here we were just actors, we didn't think of ourselves as, cyber criminals, or we weren't taking credit card information from old ladies, in our mind. And I'm not saying it's right. This is how we justified it. I was stealing secrets from Goldman Sachs and stealing them to their competitor. I was stealing secrets from Google and selling them to their competitor. So it was kind of, in our mind, part of the capitalist, you know, society, And again, in the book, as you know, I reckon with the moral issues. I don't think what I did was right. But at the time, that was how we rationalized what we did.
And tell my listeners here, you're not the one going out and coming up with ideas for what you might get, right? You are asked to go and get information.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. So basically, you know, um, it's funny. There's no corporation that is going to admit to hiring corporate spies. And someone the other day said to me, they said, Robert, do most companies hire spies? And I said, no, most companies don't. All companies hire spies. Every company hires a spy, and they're not going to tell you that. And oftentimes they're going to hire spies, and almost always they're going to hire spies through an intermediary firm, usually a consulting firm. The consulting firms hire spies, and the executive recruiting firms hire spies. And the obvious reason for that is corporations need to have plausible deniability that if for somehow I got caught and I was getting information from their top rival, that they would have a way to go, whoa, 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 we had no idea this was going on, right? And of course, I'm here to tell you, I have personally presented my extracted data to two individuals that today are one step from being the CEO of their companies. And these two firms are two of the largest firms in the world. And I personally handed them, the extracted data on their top rivals.
And so you could kind of compare what you were doing to a journalist, right? Sort of getting
Mm,
an entirely different objective, but it's the same skills, right? Which is working with sources because you're not there's a I guess the difference between a sort of hacker would be the hackers are trying to break into the system. You're getting in through humans, and so in the same way that journalists use human intelligence, you're doing exactly the same. It's just a different objective.
totally. Yeah. And we're using the same skill set, so I did an event with Valerie Plame. You may remember Valerie was a CIA spy and she was outed by the Bush administration. And that obviously ended her career because, CIA spies have to be secret. And we were doing this event and I was saying, she was talking about how much research and how much time was spent training a CIA agent before they went out into the field, right? And even though our job is not the CIA, we spend a tremendous amount of time doing research on firms. I would read their annual reports. I would study their stock price. I would be scanning news articles, looking for any kind of piece of information. If there was a conference going on, there was an offsite meeting, the football team won the day before, the star basketball player tore his Achilles and he's done for the season, right? And I would use all of that information. So when I got on the phone with somebody, I could say, hey, did you get stuck in that traffic jam today coming? Oh my God. Yeah. So that they believe that you are who you say you are. Right. And then I said, my computer skills are like a C plus at best. My daughter would probably say a C, but I don't need I'm not hacking computers. I'm hacking people. And oftentimes I can get them to hack the systems for me, which is exactly what happened recently in the MGM hacking case. It's a social engineering phone call that started that whole chain of events that brought a major Las Vegas casino to their knees from a social engineering phone call, a 10-minute phone call. And I'm here to tell you that I was impressed by that, because I like to say, give me 45 minutes, 45 minutes, and I can find out anything you want to know about your top rivals. Yeah.
You say 45 minutes there, right? So I, on the one hand, I'm sort of going 10 minutes. That seems like a really quick way in. On the other hand,
Yeah.
45 minutes, and I get this real sense of when I read you talking about some of the things that you did, is that there's a lot of time that goes into this, right? Nurturing of relationships. And so you hold people on the phone for what seemed to me to be incredibly long periods of time. And so
Yeah.
that's a very interesting skill, because you really have to develop it. Because if you said to somebody today, you're going to have a 45-minute phone conversation or longer with somebody that you've never spoken to before, that would seem like, well, I'm not going to do that. Why would I do that? And yet that's what you've got people to do. So when you talk about the 10-minute thing, I agree with you, remarkably short period of time to get in. But on the other hand, part of me is even more impressed by the fact that you've got people hanging on and engaging in conversations with you
Right.
for far longer period than I would expect I would do. But that's not to say that I wouldn't fall for these things, because I absolutely would. I'm human. But that surprises me.
Yeah. Well, when you start the conversation off, you're telling them, hey, I've just got one quick question. Just got one quick question. And the question that you're asking them, you already know the answer to. You don't even care about the answer. You're just getting them to answer the question. Because if I get you to answer one question, I can get you answer two. Now, if I get you answer two, I can probably get you an answer four. And then and you could just see where that goes. And each time I'm going, oh, I forgot one last thing. Okay. Blah, blah, blah. And then you add, oh my God, I cannot believe. Last thing, promise is the last question. Blah, blah. And also this and all, right? And you're going on and on and on and on, because most likely I'm not going to come back to this person again, right? Most likely when this person gets off the phone call with me, the 45-minute phone call, the hour and 20-minute phone call, the 2-hour phone call, believe it or not, it happens. They're going to all of a sudden start to wake up, because I've got them in a trance. I've hypnotized them, and it really is a form of hypnosis. And when they wake up, they're going to check some things out. They're going to talk to people. They're going to ask some questions, and they're going to put it together and go, oh my God, I should never have done that. Now, the next time I call that firm, I will go back to that person and I will see if they have woken up from this trance. 1 out of 3 times, approximately, the person has not woken up from the trance, and they go, oh, hey, chief compliance officer, or hey, head of tax, or hey, whatever person you've pretended you were. Hey, great to talk to you. Hey, how did it work out, that information I helped you get for that regulatory emergency? Did you need something else on that? As a matter of fact, I do. Right. And now you've made them your mole. You have an internal mole. They don't know that they're a mole for you, but they are an internal mole. And there is nothing better for a corporate spy than a long-term internal mole.
This sounds analogous to sort of people that join cults. Is once you've bought into something, I guess the more you get into it, the harder it is to get out, right? People that believe conspiracy theories as well. And so really there's an interesting thing here where the more it's almost the more you convince, the more success you can have. So from their perspective, it's just getting worse and worse. From yours, it's getting better and better.
Yeah. Well, and there's a term for it, believe it or not. It's called the Benjamin Franklin effect, right? Benjamin Franklin effect, which is, so you do me a favor, right? You've given me information, right? We think as humans that, okay, now I have to do you a favor. No, the Benjamin Franklin effect is when you do me a favor, you're now more likely to do me another favor and to do me another favor and to do me another favor, especially because we've created this imbalance in our relationship. Because when I call a person, again, I've done research, I'm going to pick someone that is lower than I am in the corporate hierarchy, maybe many levels lower than I am. So if you get a junior person on the phone, if you get a younger person on the phone, younger people oftentimes, they've grown up in this era of digital transparency. They don't have quite the same sense of proprietary about information that maybe someone that's a little bit older has. And so they're very willing to talk to you. And of course, what do corporations train their employees to do? Be good teammates, right? Have great positive corporate culture. Well, now the spy is taking advantage of that. The hacker is taking advantage of that. They're going, I'm going to use this by saying I'm somebody high up. Hey, young person. Hey, junior person. Helping me out is going to be a really positive thing for your career. Not to mention our firm, because this is a crisis. And it's always a crisis. As you know, as I know, as your listeners know, when you get the crazy text, when you get the crazy email, the phishing text, the phishing email, the phishing phone call, you got to do it now. They need, there's a problem now. You've been hacked. If you don't click on this link right now, boy, the world is going to end. You're going to lose all your money, So it's the same thing that the spy and the hacker that are using Ruse phone calls are doing, is they're using time pressure, an emergency situation to get you to do things that you shouldn't do. And one more thing, the internal mole, not only will they tell me now anything that I want to know, they'll look up anything on the corporate system that I want them to know, but even better, they will call on my behalf and get information for me. So in other words, if there's an area that now I want to get some information out of, but maybe I've tried to get in there and they've shut me down, right? But I've got my mole, and I say to my mole, hey, do you know the people that are working on that acquisition? Well, I know the assistant who's the head of the group, the top, assistant to the GM of that division or the COO of that division. Oh yeah, we're close. Can you call him or her and ask them this question about, the size of the deal, when the deal's expected to go down, what the whatever my client wants to know. Well, when my mole calls that assistant that they have a relationship with, they're not suspecting that they're a spy. They might be like, why do you want to know? But you know what? Most times they don't even ask because they know each other. They go, well, she must need this. And so now this mole I've been able to use them to get information that I was unable to access. And that's another thing corporations have no idea that goes on. They may know that there's the social engineering phone call that's kind of person to person, but they don't realize that I can get somebody inside to now be acting on my behalf. And that is very difficult to stop.
Wow. And
Yeah.
as you're doing this, I mean, people's reaction to it, obviously you'll get the people that shut you down. Is it typically a case of once you're in for a few minutes, it's gone for when do people wake up? Is it that initial thing and then their guard is down, or do people get suspicious over time? Is there a pattern there?
That's a great question. I think the answer is it's a little bit, some people right away, you're not getting through them. And some people you can, I am so good on the phone that I can hear in the silence on the line that you're waking up. I can hear it in an or a pause. I can go up, they're waking up. Here come the objections. And now I've got to try to satisfy these objections. And now I have to kind of do a little dance to try to explain why I need this information, why my number is showing up maybe as a different number they don't recognize. Where am I? Who am I doing this for? Who is the, all of those questions you have to start answering. And a lot of times once people start asking those questions, you're done. And then what my job as a spy would be is now my job is to put them to sleep, right? They're suspicious. Maybe they're getting hostile, right? They're going to sound the alarm bells, right? They're going to go to the chief compliance officer and say, hey, someone is calling saying they're you. We need to send out a company-wide email that they're trying to get information about the merger. They're trying to get information about our new product. They're trying to get information about employee salaries, whatever it is, right? So what I say is, I say, hey, you know what? Would it be easier if I just send you an email that explains everything that I'm working on? Yes, yes, that would. Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Please, please. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to question you, but please send me that email. No, absolutely, absolutely. Just I'm off site. I was jammed up. I figured I'd call you and we could just knock it out real fast. But no, don't worry about it. I will send an email. I got a couple of things I got to do real fast. I'll have it to you within an hour. Oh, great. And worst case scenario, because I got this other fire I got to put out. I'll have it to you by the end of the day. End of the day. Worst case, first thing tomorrow when you come into work, you'll have an email tells you everything and you'll be okay, great, thank you so much. So now what have I done? I've bought myself the entire rest of the day to get the intelligence that my client wants, because this person now is expecting an email which obviously is never going to arrive, but they think that it's coming, you know what I mean, it's coming, and so I've given myself time to now. They're not calling anybody, they're not sounding any alarms. I put them to sleep. And now I go and I try to find somebody else at the firm. And there's always someone at the firm that's going to tell me what I want to know.
Wow. And as you're doing this, is this tiring for you? Because I would, my start point is, clearly, I've never done this, so I would assume this would be exhausting and I'd be having all sorts of guilt trips and everything else. But I imagine, you're acting as you're doing this clearly, and you're playing a
Yeah.
character that you've researched, you've got the backstory on. And it always struck me that acting is an exhausting thing. There's a reason that plays don't go on for more than a certain number of hours, right? Because actors can't sustain
Mm.
it for that. Like, well, ignore the audience for a second, but the actor is quite challenging. Is this exhausting for you? Is this something you just get into a flow? How does that work?
Another great question. In the beginning, it was exhausting. It was exhausting. It was headache inducing. Many times I'd leave work just, my brain was going to explode. Right. But as we got better at it, as we developed, these ploys, in particular, the compliance ploy was kind of a breakthrough, but over the years, we had all these crazy ploys. One of the chapters in the book is the Y2K ploy, right? Where, as we were going from 1999 to 2000, everybody was panicked about the systems not working. Well, Pax was the genius who figured that out. That one wasn't me. And Pax is like, wait a second, if we say we're the ones trying to fix this crisis so that the firm's systems don't shut down, and he would call people and he would tell people that that's what they were working on, and people felt sorry for him. They felt sorry for him. They're like, you poor soul, that this is your job. What do you need? How can I help you? I'll get you anything because I feel sorry for you with this terrible job, with all of this pressure. And so, there was an example again of using current events, and that current event worked for quite some time. I mean, forget about all of 1999. It even worked into 2000 because we were basically saying, look, right? Like
You've held it
we
together
made it.
till now, but we're not done yet. Right, right.
We are not done yet. And there was whole things that are about to blow up because we didn't get to those, but we kind of, jimmied the system to make it work temporarily. But now, so, I think I was using Y2K into 2001 and then people were like, wait a second, you know, you know,
So really, if you've got a winning construct and you've got your research, you can get yourself into flow, I guess.
yeah. Yeah. And it got easier over time so that, and I'm not gonna, it was always challenging because, the research part of it is time consuming and difficult. And a lot of times if you're calling for super private information about a merger that's going down, there are only a handful of people maybe at the firm that know anything about that have that information. So you might only get one shot at that information, so you've got to, have done your homework because you need to be prepared for anything that could come at you in that one phone call, because that's your shot at getting this information, which is so valuable to me in terms of what I was getting paid and to my clients.
And let's talk about the ethical side of things.
Mhm.
Is this a case of at the beginning when you start? I mean, clearly you shouldn't be doing this. At no point have you said, well, or have I read you anywhere saying kind of like I wasn't aware that this was you know
No.
what you're getting into. Um, Presumably at the beginning, is it just are you able to get? I mean, you continue with it. Is it just a case of you convince yourself? What point do you start having doubts and thoughts around it?
Yeah, so in the beginning, we went and we met with an attorney in the very early days, and the attorney said, "What you're doing is in the gray, the very dark gray." And he said, "What you're doing is so new, is so unheard of, that there's no case law on this because no one's ever really caught a corporate spy before." And that was the interesting thing, when my book was presented to the folks at Steerforth, which is part of Penguin Random House. They were like, "We've never heard of a book on corporate spying. Of course we want to publish this book." They're like, "You're the first person that's actually written a tell-all on corporate spying," right? So in the beginning, we knew it was dicey, but again, it was just temporary. I was working as an actor, and there were multiple times in those early days where I was like, "I'm done with the job. I don't need it anymore." I did 4 pilots, and again, as your listeners may know, you do a pilot, and then if that pilot gets picked up and goes to series, now you're a lead in a TV series, and then if that series is successful, you become a recognizable actor, maybe even a star or a semi-star, but you have a career now and you're going to work, most likely for the rest of your days, right? I did 4 pilots and none of them got picked up. None of them went to series. And it was at that point where I started to get a little bit older and I started to go, Jesus, and then the corporate spying money was being thrown at me. It was more and more and more. And that was kind of the moment where I crossed over to the dark side. And what made me come out of it was my child. I had a child, and one day my 8-year-old heard me on the phone and said, "Dad, are you a hacker?" And I went through my whole rationalization about, well, not really, and I'm just getting it. It's part of the capitalist system, and I'm getting information from one company, and I did my song and dance, and my kid said, "But it's dishonest," and I went, "Yes, yes, it is." And that was the moment where I was like, "I have to stop doing this. I have to get out of this job." And then I began on winding it down and had the proverbial midlife crisis. And in the midst of the midlife crisis, I started writing. I'd been an English major in college. I started writing. And at one point, I started getting short stories published and essays in magazines published. And at one point, I was at a writer's conference and I read like a very early chapter from Ruse. I mean, I don't even think I had thought of it as a book yet. I think I had just thought of it as like a standalone essay. Um, and people freaked out. They freaked out. They said, "Corporate spying? Like, we didn't know there were corporate spies. Like we all know the Russians spy on the Chinese and the Chinese spy on us, but most people have no idea that the lengths corporations go to spy on each other, right? How much money they're willing to spend. Forget about millions of dollars, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars are spent on finding out secrets about rivals. Empires have been built on stealing a secret from a rival, right? And so that was the moment where the light went off at this conference about, wow, maybe there's a book here, and so I've written it, and obviously, I'm blessed that people are responding to it. I'm getting to go on shows like this. Ruse is in development for a TV series, which is beyond my wildest expectations.
So you got your
Um,
series.
so
That's
it,
the bit I love, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I got my series. I know, right? It's funny. As an actor, I didn't get it. Well, I like to say I'll believe it when I'm sitting on a set that has my name on it. But there's some really great people that are behind it, and we had these strikes which have really curtailed. Well, I mean, not curtailed, stopped. The writers and still the actors. So, but at least the writers now, which means we can actually start writing. Episodes, and then hopefully, the actors will settle soon.
Love it. Can't wait. It's going to be amazing. And is there any part of you that we've talked about the negative side of it? Is there any part of you,
Mm,
with time to reflect on it, that says actually this is fulfilling a useful function? Because if you speak to
mm,
people, say
mm,
in banks, for example, that have created
yeah,
derivatives, there is always a narrative there that. So if I look at sort of you can take derivatives really helps businesses plan for the future. If airlines couldn't hedge the oil price, then we'd have and in order for them to do that, we need a market in these products. And then you get this sort of continual, or subprime mortgages where we're helping the housing market, and that's good for the economy. There's always a sort of narrative that's there. Is there any part of you that says this does actually serve a useful function? I don't know, in terms of information transparency or leveling the playing field.
I don't know about that. I do know that, one of the big drivers for me, was, why, and I won't use the colorful language I'd like to use, but why the hell should Wall Street bankers make the money they make? It's ridiculous to me. It's ridiculous. And so when the crash came in 2008 and Wall Street blew up the world, partly because of the derivatives, partly because of the subprime lending, right? That was just further ammunition for me that, what, screw, like boo hoo for Goldman Sachs that I just got these secrets from you, or boo hoo for JP Morgan, or
Right.
boo hoo for whatever hedge fund. Like, I'm sorry. I don't feel sorry. I don't feel bad for stealing secrets from you. You know, um, Whether it serves a useful purpose or not, I don't know. I mean, I could see, you certainly could make an argument where there would be cases where it did, where, maybe, some little guy firm, found out some things, that a big guy firm was doing to them that were not legal, and then gave themselves a chance to defend themselves or take legal action. I could see something like that. But I'm not gonna make that claim in terms of, that it would justify what I did. In the beginning, it was just, like I said, I was an actor, blah, blah, blah. Then there was a certain point where it really was about providing for my family with an edge of anger at, because I went to an Ivy League school. I went to University of Pennsylvania. I graduated with a lot of people that went on to Wall Street and made like insane amounts of money, like $10 million bonuses, $15 million bonuses. I'm like, why should somebody get that kind of money? And so I felt like I deserved at least a small piece of that pie.
When you were doing it, because it struck me that to answer that sort of, is there ever a case for this? You'd sort of need to know why you were doing it, and that led me to thinking that were you presumably in most cases it was obvious why you were getting the information you're getting. If you're inquiring about a deal, it's to get that sort of, if you're inquiring about an organizational chart, who's working on a particular project, you could sort of see whether, were you ever told what the mission was for in order to help you? Because logically, they wouldn't tell you if you didn't need to know. But I presume knowing what you're trying to get the information for is helpful, or is it just blindingly obvious given the sorts of things you're looking for?
No, I always knew everything they wanted. No, I always knew. I mean, the clients would tell you, we want to know this, we want to know that, we want to know that, we want to know this. We heard so and so's getting a divorce. We heard so and so has a drinking problem. We heard like whatever it was. A lot of times it was salacial information, and I think of it as like, when you make a movie, right? And again, as an actor, I'm going back to my roots. When you make a movie in the old days, and they would use film, right? And they would cut film, and then some scenes would get cut, and those, little clips would be on the floor of the editing room, right? Well, my clients wanted to know what was on those clips, those edited out. Like, well, maybe there's something there. Maybe there's some little secret that nobody knows about. Like, they wanted to know everything. I describe it. We talked about football, your football versus, my football, right? And my football, I describe it as, if I could get the playbook for you, on the, New England Patriots, 2 days before the big game, and we knew their playbook. We knew what the plays were going to run, what the formations were, who they were going to use, so that when they were calling those plays, the defense knew what was coming. How valuable would that be? And that's what corporations are looking to do when they hire spies, is they want the playbook on their competitors. Because, you just think about it, if you're in an industry, and as industries have rankings. And so, your firm will be ranked number 7, maybe overall, or maybe number 9 in a particular area. But if you want to get up to be number 1, 2, or 3, how do you do that? Well, the smartest thing to do would be to learn what number 1, 2, and 3 are doing. Like, what are their processes? Who are their top people? That's something that is really underrated, right? So we would go in, and yes, we would get the organizational charts. And for all the amazing things that LinkedIn can tell you, LinkedIn still can't tell you who's what level and who reports to whom and all of that kind of stuff. But then more than that, what we would find out is we would get the internal rankings of each employee at a firm. And that's something that a lot of people don't know. Firms rank their employees. Every firm has some system for ranking their employees. The most obvious way is pay, right? Um, you know, But they also a lot of times have rankings, and you can find out, what people have been selected for special programs, which is usually top people that are being groomed for leadership. And we would find out all of these things so that we would find out who the rock stars were at a company. Then we would find out every single person's salary. And when you would line up these people on the rankings with their salaries, you could see, you go, okay, well, this guy's up here at the top. He makes 10 million a year. Um, that's a lot of money. Probably not going to poach that guy. Here's number two. They've been with the firm 11 years. They make 7 million. And then this next person, they've been with the firm a year and a half, and they're only making, you know, $142,000 a year, but they're producing so much. They're like basically rookie of the year, right? To use a sporting analogy. But nobody knows that they're rookie of the year outside of that firm because they're new. They've only been with the firm 6 months, 9 months, a year, 18 months, but they're killing it. Now imagine how valuable that information is if you're number 9 in your industry. If you could poach this future Hall of Famer before anybody knows how good they are, they're making 140 grand a year and you say, "Hey, look, we'll pay you 300 if you come over tomorrow." And wow, how did you hear about me? Right? Sure. And they're gone from that firm. And that's how firms can really make a difference with talent acquisition, um, which of course is another big thing with spying is to find out who the top people are and then get that information so that their rivals can steal them, can poach them.
And you talked about things that are left on the cutting room floor. You've clearly got a question you're answering, but is it sometimes just get what you can? How do they assess how successful you've been? And I guess how are you remunerated in terms of the time? Is it the amount of time you spent, the information you deliver, the questions you answer?
It's a little bit all of the above. Sometimes clients want to kind of pay you by the hour. And then sometimes clients will say, "Hey, um, here's what we're looking for. Can you bid that project for me? Can you give me an estimate on it? How much that intelligence would cost for us?" And then of course, most of my clients, I mean, obviously you're not advertising your corporate spying services, you're not posting. So so all of my clients, every single one came to me from word of mouth. And when people come to you from word of mouth, they I mean, generally I would tell people how much the project costs and that there was no
Right.
pushback. Nobody ever said a word. They go like, and as you know from the book, there was a point where I had so much work. I had so many firms calling me. It was insane that I would try to turn down, and there was one example in the book where I turned down this company and the person said, "Well, suppose I paid you double your fee." And I was like, "Oh," and they said, "And suppose I FedEx the check so you had it tomorrow morning." And I was like, okay, you got a deal." I had turned them down, but they were going to pay me double and I was going to have the money immediately in full. Right. And that's how competitive the industry was. And a brief side note, sometimes people say, "Well, what's been the most illuminating thing or surprising thing coming out of writing the book?" And I think the funniest thing was that when the book came out, so I've written a tell-all about corporate espionage, corporate spying. I've outed myself as a spy. I cannot tell you how many companies reached out and said, "Robert, we read your book." Or Robert, we listened to your book on Audible because it's on Audible, and we want to hire you. We want you to spy for us. I was like, "Well, you you do know, like I basically like told everybody in the world that I'm a spy or I was a spy. I wouldn't be very smart if I went right back into spying."
I just
You know,
I don't know because it's almost like it'd be like the worst bit of set publicity thing for that. You've written a book to get your name out there, right? It's just like,
yeah,
you
yeah. It's like, and but they didn't care, and that's the point. Is corporate America does not care. They don't care the lengths that they need to go to succeed. And look, we know that, for example, again, sports. We know how driven Tom Brady was, and how driven LeBron James is, and how hard they work out and train and take care of their bodies because they want to be at the top. Tom Cruise, same thing, right? He wants to be at the top. C-level executives of publicly traded and major private companies are exactly the same. They are driven, competitive individuals. They want to win. They want to win. They want to make a ton of money. They want to be on CNBC. They want to be on the cover of magazines. And they know they need to get secrets on their rivals to stay ahead of them. And so they're willing to do whatever it takes, and you can make an argument that that's part of the capitalist system and that's the way it should be. I don't know that I agree with that, but obviously I went along with that for quite some time.
And turning to the other side of the fence, like as you've pointed out how relatively easy this is. What can people do to defend themselves against it? Because what you've neatly
Yeah.
identified is that you're playing into, I mean, to use sort of simple terminology, behavioral science, right? You recognize how people are, their expectations of situations, and using that to your advantage. So because people employ human beings, that makes all organizations vulnerable to this.
Yeah. Right. Well, that's a great question. And I think it's actually fairly easy to do to stop this kind of stuff. Maybe you're not going to have 100% success, but right now they have 0% success, or 5% success, whatever. Like, in other words, if I picked up the phone right now, I could get 8 or 9 out of 10 people to tell me what I wanted to know. 8 or 9 out of 10, right? There'd be one person that would shut me down. There'd be another person that'd be a little hesitant. But for the most part, the other people would tell you what you want to know. So, we certainly could do far better than that. What we want to do is change that. So maybe it's only 1 out of 10 people that's going to release information, right? And we're going to try to do even better than that. The key thing is training. And from your work, corporations have done a really remarkable job protecting the technology, right? Firewalls and encryption and two-factor authentication, all of these different things that firms have spent a lot of money and a lot of effort, but they have done almost nothing on the human side, right? I mean, zero. And by the way, the money that you would spend on the human side is far less than the technical side, right? You know, right? It's a fraction, it's a tenth, maybe less. And so it's shocking to me that corporations aren't recognizing, and especially after this MGM hack, any compliance officer worth their salt has got to be doing social engineering training for their employees. It's just, how are you not doing that? How are you not having somebody come in? I don't care if it's me. I got a TV series I'm working on. I mean, I'm happy to do it, but it's not what I want my career to be. But I enjoy doing it, because I think it's fun. Another thing is, so many times when you get speakers come in, it's kind of tedious. It's textbook. I'm coming in and I'm going, this is Gerhard calling from the office in Frankfurt, Germany. Perhaps the European Union regulators here, and we need some information from the States. So now that I'm literally doing the accent of the chief compliance officer, Gerhard Mannheim, who's presented me, right? In other words, I'm literally showing you how easy it is. And people are like, oh my God, wow. And so it's fun. And when it's fun for people, they remember it, they enjoy it, they tell people, and that's how you get change to occur, is people are connected to something, rather than sitting in the back going, God, I can't wait for this to be over so I can get the sandwich that's sitting right out. It's only 10 feet away. I want to go get the you know, the buffet that, you see it, all these things. So I think that chief compliance officers, chief technology officers, chief operating officers need to do a much better job of training and educating employees, especially lower level employees that are dealing with customers on helplines, because those people they're not getting paid a lot of money. It's pretty easy to influence them, right? It's pretty easy, for me to use my social engineering, my rusing, pretend to be a higher up executive, and convince a younger person, a newer person with the firm to, to do a lot of stuff that can, cost the firm tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, how much did it cost MGM? Whatever number they're telling you, it's double or triple that
Right,
number,
right.
you know? And the reputational damage, because now everybody's like MGM hack, MGM hack, MGM hack, it's embarrassing, do you want to be the chief compliance officer of MGM? No,
Right.
that's not, you know what I mean? Like, that is not, that's just not a fun job right now, And so I think corporations, can do far better with just having some social engineering training and education so employees know that this stuff is out there. And then, of course, when I do it, I give firms techniques to use, verification things that can be done that will make it so it is, you know, as bulletproof as anything can be, because once you tell people, look, you cannot release any information for any reason, regardless of who the person is. If it's the CEO on the phone, you cannot tell the CEO anything. Right? Once you get that set, you know, and you start having people show, meet somebody like me showing, like, there's going to be somebody that calls who sounds exactly like the CEO that you saw on CNBC last week, or you heard speak at the company, annual address or whatever. It's very easy, yes. But once they know, no, 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 then, you can really make change in a firm and protect them from a devastating, ransomware attack, which is, obviously what the MGM hack was.
And what are your thoughts about, because we see in terms of emails, you get firms that obviously send fake phishing emails to their employees.
Sure, sure.
What are your thoughts about getting people to do what you used to do as an exercise? Because on the one hand, right, the best way to train people is to put them in a live thing. On the other hand, there's a really interesting ethical question there about, should you be doing that? It can feel, depending on how you then react to what the employees do, could feel like entrapment. So I mean,
Right.
so it seems to me, on the one hand, it's like, logically, if you sort of looked at it, well, what's a good way to teach people, put them in the position to do it. But on the other hand, that could pose all sorts of problems. So my gut instinct is to say it's probably slightly dangerous, but it could be very effective.
Yeah, I mean, look, I would never do my penetration testing where I was not given a guarantee that the person that I got to give me information would be penalized or whatever, demoted or, get in trouble. Like, what I say in advance is, look, if you're going to hire me and you want me to do penetration testing in addition to the training, and the training I think is the most important part, but if you want me to do some penetration testing to show you how obvious these weaknesses are, I can do that. But the people that I get on the phone that release information to me, you can't do anything to them because that's not fair, because they just happen to be the poor soul that answered the phone that day. If I can get this person at the firm to tell me stuff, and if I can get another person at the firm, basically I'm going to get almost anybody at the firm to tell me stuff. So it's not fair that it's just this person that I happen to call this day, or I picked on because I did my research and I said, this person's going to give it up, right? That's just not right. So that's something that I do say to corporations is, if you want me to do penetration testing to show you where some of these holes are, we've got to indemnify these employees and then just bring them in for training. And I think the most fun thing for these kind of events is be in person. Like, I bring people up and we role play. Like, we literally do, you know, scenes where, I'm like, okay, this is, here it goes. This is what it's going to look like. And I want you to, how are you going to stop me? I want you to tell me stuff. And sometimes what I'll do is if I know, like, generally the groups that are coming, so I know, okay, there's this customer service team coming and there's this other, the teams that are on the phones, or, and I'll do some research on the people that I think are going to be there. And then I'll call one of those people up, and and they don't know that I've studied where they went to college. I've looked at their Instagram. I da 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 da. So now
Right.
I'm going, hi, and you can see them in the midst of this call because they just think it's random.
Right.
You know what I mean? I mean, it's a bit like a magic show,
I
right?
was going to say
So,
that's what
so
it
they,
sounded like.
yeah,
Yeah.
so it's like, they're up there and they're like, I'm not going to fall for this because they know not to fall for it because they know it's like, so, and then all of a sudden you're like, so, you went to the University of, and they're like, yeah, like all of a sudden they begin to see how hard it is to not fall for these things. And that's why there has to be a zero tolerance policy about releasing information that has to be firm wide, and it has to be, um, people have to be trained. They have to be trained. They have to see in person. This is how wrong it can go. Right. And then I'll also have an example where I will get someone, and this will be someone we'll work with before, that will be someone that you see them giving up the information. You see them doing all the things that they should do. You see them resetting passwords. You see them using their password to get you in, all of those things. And so the people in the audience are going, oh my God, wow, that's how it happens. Like they're seeing it in real time. So now they know that's what it looks like. And so are they going to do that now? No, they're not. They're not. So yeah, I mean, I think it is definitely something that corporations, better wake up. Like I said, if you're a compliance officer and you're not doing social engineering training, you're not doing your job.
Yeah, because I mean, it always struck me when I was in banking and had an assistant. It was always the amount of time we spent training her on obscure regulations that would never, didn't mean anything, would never be relevant, and there was always some theoretical reason why everybody in the organization needs to know. And it always just occurred to me that, right, who's answering the phone? Because I'm spending most of my time in pointless meetings, but she's answering. If anybody's answering the phone on my behalf, it's going to be her. And I was sitting there thinking, to your
Right.
point around junior employees, it's like we have people whose roles involve the telephone. And so why are we not like that? We should think about that. The more time you spend on the phone, the more calls you pick, the more opportunity you have to fall foul of what you're talking about. And it
Right.
struck me that it's such an obvious point, and I'm glad you made it in the way you did, because I think once you sort of start thinking about it, if this was sort of, well, we're worried about people having car accidents, well, let's look at who's doing the most amount of driving, and then we can logically go, they present a greater risk. So if you're on the phone quite a bit, then that presents a greater risk. So why are we not managing in
Right.
those terms?
Right. And remember, again, if I get somebody on the phone and I win them over and they believe that I am who I say I am, now I can turn them and have them go anywhere else within the firm that I want them to get information from me. So it could be a lowly person on a customer service desk. It could be a junior analyst in some, accounting department, but they have access to the servers. They have access to the network. They have access to so many things. And so now, even though they don't know that much in their job per se, whatever their job is, now I'm putting them to work on my behalf. Right. And then maybe theoretically, they introduce me to somebody that they vouch for me. They go,
Right.
"Hey, I've got the head of compliance on the phone. I'm going to transfer him over. He's off-site meeting with the regulators in Brussels. It's an emergency." Um, right? Exactly.
Right.
Can you help him out? He's a great guy. And so now the person on the other end of the phone who doesn't know me, I don't even have to ruse them. They pick up the phone and they go, "Yes, Mr. Mannheim, how can I help you?" "Oh, I really appreciate it. This is a real crisis over here." "Okay, well, look, I pulled those numbers up. I got them right here for you." Or, "Here's the deal memo. This is the proposed, blah, 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 blah,"
Right.
or whatever, I mean, so that's the thing is that the weakest link, right? It's the low hanging fruit. And look, I can't say every ransomware attack starts with social engineering, but almost every ransomware attack, the social engineering is what starts it, because somebody needs to understand certain things about the firm, about the technology, about the network, about all of that stuff. And they're usually using the phone call to some junior person in some far flung office to get that information that they then are now able to hack a system or use the people to then do it for them.
And of course, what's interesting about all the things you're talking about is that technology is only going to make this even more challenging, right? So as deep fakes and
Yeah.
AI get smarter about these things, you can sort of see the role that you were fulfilling as a human could soon be fulfilled. And so we'll have that hybrid stage, I guess, where we'll have humans powered by AI. So if the technology will suggesting it'll be a human at the front end because it's not quite convincing enough, but we can see that over time technology will take that. So what I think is really interesting here is you're pointing to something where you might say, well, the advent of technology will make humans redundant. Actually, the advent of technology is going to make the dynamics you're talking about much more challenging.
Yeah, for sure. You will no longer have to have gone to Juilliard and trained as an actor to do 16 different accents, right? To be able to impersonate, the compliance officer who's based in Dublin or the whomever, right? You're going to be able to use AI to create someone else's voice. And, we live in a time where, especially for people that are at the C level, most of those individuals are speaking. They're speaking places. So we have recordings of their voices, right? And they're on YouTube and they're at a conference, or they post on the internet, right? So we can capture their voice. And so now we can create their voice. And that's what the scary thing is that if I can get your voice, some recordings of it, put it through the proverbial AI machine, and now create text. And now all of a sudden we've got a situation where the person calling on the phone sounds exactly like your friend. I mean, now we're really pushing it, but it sounds like your friend, your wife, your kid, your boss, your boss's boss. And how do you prevent that? How do you stop that? Well, people have got to be trained that this exists, that this could happen. And that's why you cannot release any information over the phone whatsoever for any reason. And then you have a protocol where there's a system where there's a way for people to inform when they get that phone call, so that now the firm can, like I said, the firm can sound the alarm. Hey, we're getting people calling. This is what they're saying. This is what, and so now everybody gets that email in their inbox coming from a company email, so that you really stop the spy and the hacker dead in their tracks, the ransomware attacker dead in their tracks, because right away somebody knows this is wrong. They tell somebody who's in a senior position, maybe it's, the deputy compliance officer. And then there's this process that the word is spread, and that, that kind of MGM hack situation is stopped right away.
And of course, this isn't just something that can happen in a work context. We're getting lots of cases now of people being contacted by family members in distress asking for money. And so one of
Yeah.
the things I've heard you talk about before, which I thought was excellent, I've already actioned with my parents, got to be careful not to reveal it now, is this kind of idea of, well, how do you know it's me? And this could apply
Yeah.
to voice call, could apply to WhatsApp, whatever. The idea of having code words or some
Yep.
information, something that it would be impossible for somebody to find out. And so setting that
Right.
up seems to me to be very sensible, as long as you genuinely keep it secret, don't have a list somewhere that someone could find.
Right. Well, it should be something that is not easily learnable. Like, it's not going to be date of birth or address or, college you went. Like, those things, anybody can find that out. So it's got to be something that only you and your parents know. Like, what was I doing when I, broke my arm when I was 9, or where was I when I broke my arm? That's your code word, and it was, whatever. Right. So it's not something that's ever been, that you've written about or you posted on social media. And so then you have this code word, which somebody can ask. I mean, look, I'm a corporate spy. I get people trying to fish me, scam me, dupe me, hack me, ruse me all the time. And sometimes I'm looking at the stuff going, that is really good. Like, that is really good, and I'm super suspicious. So, I think, you know, humility when it comes to cybercrime, cybersecurity is a really important quality for everyone to have, because it is easy to get tricked. It is easy. It really is easy. And people have to understand that, so that there's no shame about reporting. And there's a much greater sense of, we got to do better. We got to do better, and, not to think that, oh, I'm too smart to get tricked, or my team is too smart to get tricked, or my company is too smart to get. It's like, no, no, it just takes one person, and every firm's got that person. And so we got to do a much better job of training it, so that, the numbers of people that are like that at the firm get really, really, really reduced. Until eventually, like at Apple, there's no one like that at Apple. I've researched that firm, and it is basically impossible. Not impossible.
Love that. And how has this changed you? Because I mean, you talked a little bit about you recognize you're susceptible to it. How has this changed
Yeah.
your relationship with the phone? Are you
Ah,
are you more cautious? Has it changed anything at all? How does that play out?
um, I almost never answer the phone because, if I don't know the number, then I'm not going to answer the phone. But there's a really hilarious thing. So, again, when this book was about to come out, one of the corporate spies I trained was freaking out about the book, because he thought that my book, being this expose in corporate spying, was going to end corporate spying. Like, it was going to, like, every corporation was going to go, oh my God, that's the end of corporate spying. And so
Right.
he thought his job was over, right? He thought his career was over, and he's spying. He needs money, so he was freaking out. And he kept texting me, and, I didn't have a relationship with him. I hadn't dealt with him for over a decade. And So I just didn't want to respond. I didn't want to respond. So I wasn't responding. And each text was more, come on, call me, urgent, emergent, and he was trying, and so I blew him off. And one day my phone rings and it's my mom. And I pick up and I answer the phone and it's him. So he's call spoofed me with my mom's number, which was just genius. It was genius, and that shows you how good these spies are. Like he got me to answer the phone.
Right.
So that's one reason I don't answer the phone. But look, I've got tricks to get people to answer the phone that don't answer the phone, like he used, the call spoofing, when you can call spoof and you get a number that shows up that somebody goes, oh, that looks familiar. Maybe it's the exact number, maybe it's almost the exact number, maybe it's just the area code and the prefix are the same. But you do things that um, get people to worry, to think. And then my favorite, here's a tip for your audience. This is a great one. It's so simple, but it works. So you call someone, right? Their phone rings and rings and rings, goes to voicemail. You hang up. They didn't answer. What do? You call right back. You call right back. You dial the number again. So now the person on the other end, they saw the first call. I mean, if they have their phone around, which of course in this day and age, most of us do all the time.
Right.
So now they see a number come in again, a second time. Now they don't recognize the number, but now there's a second call. So they're like, wow, man, I wonder if something's going on. I wonder if something happened with my kids, with my mom. Yeah, in other words, there's somebody calling me and maybe there's been an accident. So it's a stranger's phone number. And now they answer it. Now they answer it. And I cannot tell you how many times that second immediate phone call, the person picks up the phone.
Right.
And then if you're rusing them, now you got them on the phone.
Right. Which is all you need to start the conversation, right?
That's all you need. They just have to answer the phone. Yeah. And now you're off to the races. Hey, sorry to bother you. We got a crisis.
Right, which again actually is reinforced by the repeat calling, right? Because logically you
right.
are repeat calling because it is a crisis.
It's an emergency. Yeah, it's an emergency. And I'm sorry to, I was going to have to call you 10 times because we are really jammed up, and blah, 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 blah. And then you give them your story. We're at the offsite in, it's Sun Valley, because now, everybody's at the offsite in Sun Valley, so they go, oh, you're at the offsite. Oh my God, my boss is at the offsite. I know. He told me to call you, you know? Yeah, oh, okay.
Love it. Amazing. Robert, I could keep talking to you forever. And clearly you're very good at keeping people talking. And it's come across in the way that you engage. You also write amazingly. And I want to say thank you for writing a book
Yeah.
that was, I mean, the subject matter lends itself to being a great book, but actually just the way you talk about things and the storytelling. And anybody listening to this show should obviously read it because, as I say, it starts off with a compliance officer being impersonated. When does that ever happen as the opener to anything? So for that reason alone, people should read it. But other than that, I thought it was fascinating because it really revealed something. There's some great anecdotes in there. And Dinner with the Yakuza was one of my favorite chapters, which just sort of I wasn't expecting to come across, but we'll leave that hanging there for people to read about. It really is as amazing as you think. And so you've had this kind of incredible Hollywood lifestyle. It's beautifully written, so it comes thoroughly recommended. But I think in amongst all of that, and this is why I doubly recommend it, is not just is it super engaging and fun to read, but there's a ton of lessons in there, I think, about human behavior, and you've really sort of unpicked it. And I think in what you do, particularly as you're training people, but I think also just the way you talk about it. If we reflect on the anecdotes that you tell, there's a lot that we can all learn for ourselves. And it might be a completely different context, completely different thing, but we can start to recognize some of the weaknesses of human decision making. And I think for that reason, it's it's a beautifully packaged training book in many respects.
Well, thank you. I didn't intend to write a training book because, I wanted to write a book. I wrote it during COVID. So, we needed something that was fun, right? So I wanted to write one of the reviews said it reads like a spy novel.
Right.
It's a page turner, but it's all true, right? But yeah, a lot of people have come back to me and said, man, I learned a lot. I'm doing a call with, I do calls like with companies. I didn't know this, but a lot of companies have book clubs, and a lot of the book clubs that are like corporate book clubs, they love this book because there are not a lot of corporate training kind of books that are really fun to read. They're usually more, instructional and dry, right? And I love doing these events because people ask great questions, because they're on the inside and they're like, hey, I had this thing happen the other day, and I'm like, okay, that was a spy,
That was me.
right
I'm sorry. That
there.
was
Yeah. Yeah. I'm probably know who it was. They're not, I'm literally, you can count on one hand how many top spies are out there, corporate spies. Yeah. in
Amazing.
about 5. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
listen, as I knew it would, time has flown. Thank you so much. Thank you for writing an amazing book and for also for coming on the show and being an amazing guest. I am really looking forward to the TV show. It's going to be amazing because it just lends
Oh,
itself to exactly that. So I look forward to that happening as and when that's possible. But above all, thank you
right.
so much. It's been a real pleasure. And
Yeah.
by the way, if people want to get hold of you, tell them how they can find you.
Oh, thank you so much. I tell people, go to my website. It's just my name, robertkerbeck.com, Kerbeck. You can email me directly from my site. I respond to everybody. There's no filter. It's me. Tell me what you like. Tell me what you didn't like. If you're looking to pivot into a new career as a corporate spy, I'll give you some tips on how to do that. uh, you know, so, because I'm out, so I might as well share the wealth. I really appreciate you bringing me on. It was a pleasure, and I hope our paths cross again soon.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
So that's it for this episode of the Human Risk Podcast. My enormous thanks to Robert for appearing and to you for listening. To find out more about Robert, his book, Ruse, Lying the American Dream from Hollywood to Wall Street, and some of the subjects we discussed in the show, have a look in the show notes. There are links to those there. If this is your first time listening to the Human Risk Podcast, welcome. You can subscribe wherever you get your quality audio content. It's available on all of the major podcasting platforms. If you like the show and have yet to leave a review for it, please do wherever you download the show. It really does help. To discover episodes of the show that you might have missed before, visit humanriskpodcast.com. I'll be back very soon with another episode of the show, but in the meantime, stay safe. Look out for corporate spies trying to get information from you that they really shouldn't have. And thank you so much for listening.